guys, welcome back to Intelligent Faith 315. This is Pastor Jay. Today we're continuing on with part 3 of our new mini-series, God, the Best Explanation. And throughout the duration of this mini-series, we're going to be seeking to demonstrate that it does appear that the best explanation of numerous features of our universe would happen to be a personal creator God. The features that we're going to be examining throughout the course of the mini-series, as we talked about in parts 1 and part 2, would be the following. The fact that the universe exists, it has a beginning, that it is finely tuned for the existence of complex biological life for conscious observers, that the universe also has mathematical and logical applicability. The universe has the feature of moral objectivity. Also, that in our universe there is conscious intentionality that begs out or cries out for an explanation. And then also feature number 8, that theistic possibility is real. Logically, there does seem to be that possibility for God's existence that is a significant feature of our universe that needs an explanation. And if you're with us last time, we did dive into that first feature, the existence of our universe. This, of course, is one of the most fundamental questions of philosophy. Why is there anything rather than nothing? And just to summarize quickly, the material that we covered was number 1, every contingent thing has an explanation for its existence. Number 2, if the universe has an explanation for its existence, it is a transcendent personal being. The only other alternative is to say the universe has no explanation for its existence, or the universe itself is a necessary being that's impossible for it not to exist. This premise seems to be much more plausible and in line with what we know to be true about reality. That if the universe has an explanation, it is a transcendent personal being. Premise number 3, the universe is a contingent thing. The universe is a thing that could possibly not exist, that doesn't have to be. And if that is the case, the preliminary conclusion is therefore the universe has an explanation of its existence. And the final conclusion is that therefore the explanation of the universe is a transcendent personal being. Transcendent because it is outside of the universe, because it is the very explanation for the time, space, matter, and energy of the universe, and must therefore be transcendent outside of the universe by definition, and would have to be a personal being, because the only immaterial, transcendent being that we know of that could be the explanation would be numbers or a personal mind, an unembodied immaterial mind. Numbers cannot cause anything. They could never be a sufficient explanation. The only other candidate would be a transcendent personal being. And so as you examine these 5 premises, this abductive reasoning, seeking to explain that feature that the universe does indeed exist, it appears that God is the best explanation for the beginning, or rather, for the existence of the universe. This, of course, is a very simplified version. It's a different version of the contingency argument for God's existence. If you're not familiar with it, I do encourage you to go into our website, intelligentfaith315.com, and search for the contingency argument, or just Google that argument yourself, the contingency argument from Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. And this is a simplified version of that. The existence of the universe definitely seems to point to God. So for today, we're going to go on to our second feature of the universe, that it does seem that it points to the existence of God as the best explanation. As you can see highlighted here in red, the beginning of the universe is a very significant feature that needs to be explained and needs to be pointed out. So have you ever pondered this question? You as the viewer, you as the listener, whether you are a philosophical naturalist, a materialist, an atheist, whatever philosophical or religious perspective you hold to, have you ever asked yourself the question, what is the best way to explain the fact that our universe did indeed have a beginning? Well, let's jump into it together. Number 1, the first premise that we need to come to is the fact that the universe began to exist. Now, of course, you don't have to agree with that, but as we're going to discover in a few seconds here, you're going to be disagreeing with some of the most well-founded and incredible discoveries of modern 20th century science, cosmology, and astrophysics. You can, of course, claim that the universe didn't begin to exist, but rather has always existed, is eternal in the past, but you're going to be going against science and philosophy, and almost nobody believes that anymore. But of course, you can bypass this premise by thinking that. However, if you want to be a scientifically minded person using good inductive reasoning and what we know to be true about the world from physical observations and science, there's at least 5 ways that we know of in science that tell us the universe had a beginning. The first one is the second law of thermodynamics. Of course, you can remember all 5 of these reasons that point to the fact that the universe had a beginning a finite time ago, whether that was 13.7 billion years ago or some other time that you might think of. The point is, there seem to be 5 reasons, scientifically speaking, why we can definitely say we know as a scientific matter of fact the universe had a beginning, began to exist a finite time ago. First one, the S, is for the second law of thermodynamics. Of course, the second law, this is also known as entropy. And this is the fact scientifically that every known system of energy is losing heat, losing energy. It's losing the ability to perform useful work. In layman's terms, this is the fact that the universe does seem to be physically running down. The universe is going from a state of order to disorder, from a state of organization to disorganization, from a state of high energy and high heat to low energy and low heat. So this is what we call the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics is so well established today that if your scientific goal was to do further research in this area, you basically would have no future. Basically, this is such a well-established law in the area of science. No real further research essentially is being done in this area. It is such a well-established law and principle of science that we know of. But taking this to be the case, how can the second law of thermodynamics point back to the fact that the universe began to exist? Well, very simply this. We know the universe is running down, but we know that the universe hasn't run down completely yet. There is still heat in the universe. There is still a certain amount of energy and organization within the physical universe. Therefore, we know that it couldn't be eternal in the past. If the universe has existed for eternity, then according to the second law, things would have already run out an eternity ago. So in other words, if the universe is eternal and infinite in the past, the universe would already be dead, so to say, would already have experienced this burnout and heat death, which we know eventually will happen according to the second law if something doesn't change. However, since we know that the universe obviously hasn't run out yet, the second law shows us that the universe is not infinite in the past, not eternal in the past, but rather the universe began to exist a finite time ago. It's kind of like saying your car is running low on gas. It's running low on gas, so that means that a certain time ago it was filled up. If your car had been running forever, well, of course, your car would already be empty. But the very fact that it still has a minimal amount of fuel in it shows that it's only been running for a finite amount of time. In the same way, we know that the universe is not eternal and infinite in the past, because according to the second law, it would have already been dead and experienced heat death by now. The universe began to exist. Number one, we know that's true from the second law of thermodynamics. Number two, we know this is the case from the universal expansion, which, as you can see, was discovered by Edwin Hubble in 1929 from the Mount Wilson Observatory. Now, of course, if you know the story, Edwin Hubble, he looked through his telescope at the Mount Wilson Observatory, and he noticed that the light from distant galaxies was red-shifted. And all you need to understand from that is it means that these galaxies were spreading apart at rapid speeds. This is why the light was redshifted. And so Edwin Hubble theorized that the universe was indeed expanding. Albert Einstein confirmed this later on, and of course today we know that the universe is actually expanding according to a certain constant rate. This is known as the cosmological constant. This is a mathematical numerical constant. It's the speed at which the universe must and does expand at. Edwin Hubble, he established this back in 1929, and after that, that the universe is expanding in all directions in that sense. So if you think of this as, let's say, a movie, if the universe is expanding and you pause the movie, run it in reverse, of course, what would you get? Well, you would get all of the galaxies and all the star systems coming closer and closer together and then ultimately coalescing into a single point of infinite density in dimensionless space. And ultimately, this would result in coming into existence literally from nothing. All time, all space, all matter, and all energy. And of course, this is what the Big Bang Theory points to. The Big Bang Theory of cosmology points to that fact that there is a boundary condition, there is a boundary point, that space, time, matter, and energy began to exist a finite time ago. We know this from the second law, but also from the universal expansion discovered by Edwin Hubble in 1929. Thirdly, we know this to be the case because of the radiation heat echo. As you can see here, Arno Penzias, a scientist named Wilson, at the Bell Labs, they discovered that there is remnant heat in the far reaches of space from this initial, I guess you could say, cosmic explosion, this creation event, this Big Bang explosion. They discovered the radiation heat echo. This was, in a very real sense, the smoking gun of the universe coming into existence. This is the remnant heat left over from this initial Big Bang explosion. And these gentlemen won the Nobel Peace Prize for their discovery, and this is empirical scientific evidence of this initial creation event, initial explosion, so to say, of the Big Bang, of time, space, matter, and energy violently, explosively coming into being. And of course, you can go onto NASA and just Google search these images for the radiation heat echo discovered by Penzias and Wilson, of course, awarding them the Nobel Peace Prize for that. This is the third scientific way in which we know that the universe began to exist a finite time ago. Fourthly, galaxial ripples. This was discovered by the COBE satellite in 1989. COBE, of course, stands for the Cosmic Background Explorer. And essentially, if the Big Bang Theory were true, if Big Bang cosmology was a reality, what they expected to find in 1989 as they sent out the COBE satellite was certain galaxial patterns of matter and, well, basically just matter being clumped together in certain formations that were predicted by the Big Bang cosmological model. And you can do some research on this. The scientists that were involved in these galaxial ripple discoveries from the COBE satellite, these gentlemen were quoted as saying that when the galaxial ripples, these certain specific formations of matter and galaxies in deep space as a result of the initial Big Bang bringing all time, space, matter, and energy explosively into being, these scientists involved in that said, quote, "It was like looking at the machining marks of the Creator." And so these gentlemen who were involved in the COBE satellite, they discovered these galaxial ripples which were predicted by the Big Bang, and for them it was absolutely incredible scientific evidence and confirmation empirically of this mathematical theory, the Big Bang theory of the beginning of the universe a finite time ago. So the second law, universal expansion, the radiation heat echo, and the galaxial ripples from the COBE satellite point to the beginning of our universe, and then also certain equations of mathematics. Of course, this first equation, E equals mc squared, I'm sure you're very, very familiar with this. This, of course, is Albert Einstein's theory of relativity. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. And many, many things that we know about this equation, but one of the initial things that we learn, something that bothered Albert Einstein, is that it points back to the creation of the universe, that the universe had a point of beginning a finite time ago. It's a well-known historical fact that Albert Einstein was bothered by this. He was annoyed by this. He actually tried to modify his equations, but eventually admitted that this mathematical theory, which is confirmed by empirical observations, such as the universal expansion, which he went to Mount Wilson Observatory and looked through Edwin Hubble's telescope, it does indeed point back to the beginning of our universe. E equals mc squared. Albert Einstein a man who believed in a God, not the God of Christianity, but in some kind of a deistic or pantheistic creator, his equation, the most famous equation in the world, points to the beginning of a universe. And I just encourage you as the listener to pay attention to that. One of the greatest scientific minds, a man, Albert Einstein, who changed physics from the Newtonian model, also a great Christian scientist, to now this new Einsteinian model, this revolution in physics. He proved mathematically the universe began to exist, and he also believed in God. However, there is another mathematical theory. I have up here BGV, and this is the Borde, Guth, and Vilenkin theorem, which was formulated in 2003. And I do encourage you to do some research on this. Arvin Borde, Alexander Vilenkin, and Arvin Guth in 2003 established a mathematical theory which has gotten some interesting press in recent years, that any universe which over the history of that universe has any expansion whatsoever must have had a point of beginning in the finite past. Let me say that again. The BGV theorem, the Borde, Guth, and Vilenkin theorem of 2003, states that any universe which over the average course of its history is expanding, including the multiverse theory, must have had a beginning a finite time ago in the past. And so the BGV theorem, especially for those of you who may hold to the multiverse theory, and you may think that the multiverse theory, if it's even true, would be an escape hatch to escape the beginning of the universe, this is not the case. The Borde, Guth, and Vilenkin theorem in 2003 absolutely demonstrates with mathematical certainty that the universe, even the multiverse, did have a beginning a finite time ago in the distant past. And so as you can see up here, there are 5 separate aspects of scientific discovery in the 20th century that point powerfully and persuasively to the scientific fact that the universe began to exist a finite time ago. Now, philosophy also points to the fact that an actual infinite cannot exist, and that you cannot cross an infinite, but instead of getting into those philosophical proofs that the universe is eternal, or against the fact that the universe is eternal, we'll just stick with these 5 scientific evidences. Because I'm sure the vast majority of our non-Christian viewers love science, as you rightly should. Science points to the truth of this first premise. The universe began to exist a finite time ago. And again, just remember this 5-letter word, surge. And you can remember these 5 scientific evidences that prove the truth of the first premise. We then go on to the second premise. If the universe began to exist, then the universe has a transcendent cause. Now, this is very, very basic, but just think of it in this sense. If all of time, space, matter, and energy, if the entire physical universe came into being a finite time ago, if it had a beginning, then the cause of that must be outside of the universe. The only other explanation would be to say that the universe was self-caused. You can't say that the universe is eternal because we just proved that it began to exist. But you could perhaps say that the universe is self-caused. And as we said in our last video, I believe that Daniel Dennett, a philosopher who just really makes no sense in this area, he claims that the universe is self-caused. Now, listen to me. If that were the case, this is what would have to happen. The universe would have to exist before it existed in order to bring itself into existence. It would have to pre-exist its own existence in order to bring itself into existence. That is one of the most illogical and incoherent ideas that has ever been thought of. And that kind of a thing is just, not just illogical, it is impossible, logically speaking, and in reality. So you have no other choice. Once we understand the universe began to exist, well, then it must have a transcendent cause. Everything that does begin to exist has a cause, and if there is a cause for the universe, it has to be transcendent, because all transcendent means, after all, is it is outside of the universe. And by definition, this cause would have to be outside of the universe because it's the cause of the entire universe. And so premise number 2 seems to be more plausible than the opposite. If the universe began to exist, then the universe has a transcendent cause. Of course, the only other way that you could perhaps try to get around this is to say the universe has no cause. It is just simply uncaused, unexplained, and this, of course, goes against all scientific thinking, all scientific reasoning. As we said in our last video, the scientific enterprise is essentially a search for causes and a search for an explanation. Science points to the fact that the universe began to exist, and if it began to exist, it must have a cause outside of the universe, which means it is a transcendent cause. And premise number 3, therefore, the universe has a transcendent cause. And that essentially, ladies and gentlemen, is basically this argument that the best explanation for the beginning of the universe is a transcendent cause. Now, what is transcendent? What is something that is immaterial and exists beyond and outside of the universe? As we said in our last video, the only 2 candidates that we can really possibly conceive of would be these immaterial abstract objects like numbers or shapes, or an unembodied, immaterial, timeless mind. Of course, a mind isn't a material, physical object. So which one could it be? Would it be these immaterial, non-physical, abstract objects like numbers and shapes and so forth, as some people do believe actually exist transcendently, such as Plato did and some philosophers of mathematics do today? Well, it couldn't be numbers, because you see, numbers don't cause anything. The number 7 doesn't cause anything. Circles or geometric shapes, they don't cause anything, even if they did exist immaterially and in a transcendent way. The only other candidate would be a transcendent cause that would have to be an immaterial mind. It would be immaterial because it would be the cause of the material world. It would also be timeless because it is the cause of all time. This would also be tremendously, unimaginably powerful because it is the cause of all energy and matter in the universe. And of course, it would have to be personal because the universe beginning to exist implicates, it points to the fact that this being made a decision at a certain moment in time to act and to allow the universe, to cause the universe to come into being. And so this simple form of abductive reasoning points us to a transcendent, immaterial, timeless, tremendously powerful personal being that is the cause of the entire physical universe. And of course, already, those are some of the primary qualities and attributes of a personal creator, especially the one that is taught from the Christian worldview. So I do encourage you to think about this. The beginning of the universe, something that is established very well by science, it points to the fact that there is a transcendent cause. And if that is true, if there is a transcendent cause of the universe, it would have to mean that it is an immaterial, personal being that is timeless, spaceless, and unimaginably powerful, the cause of the entire physical universe. It appears that God is the best explanation for the beginning of the universe. I encourage you to think about that. Come back and join us next time as we begin to discuss the fine-tuning of the universe, another feature that needs an explanation. Until next time, have an intelligent faith.